The factory pattern is the 50,000-foot roadmap of where you want to be with software product lines. So this is a composite pattern that brings in a lot of the other patterns. So this is your goal state for a software product line effort that operates in terms of the patterns. So you will see patterns that deal with the decision about what's the set of products, the what to build pattern. You will also see a pattern for creating a core asset, a pattern for creating a product from the core asset. So this is the overall roadmap of the product line and the end state that you are aspiring to when you implement all of these patterns. So we have patterns like the assembly line pattern, which looks at the tool support necessary to support core asset development and product development, and the level of process discipline you need to have to create the attached processes for the core assets and ultimately come up with a production plan. You have the each asset pattern for making sure that every asset that you create is an effective baselined member of your core asset base. The each asset pattern covers both software and non-software assets. In fact, the one that pertains particularly to the software assets that show up in the products you build is the product parts pattern. The product builder then is the pattern that takes those product parts and turns them into products. There are a couple of practice areas or patterns that we won't go into detail into in this module, the in motion and the monitor pattern. These are the checks and balances that you apply when you're partway along product line development and when you're operating as a full-up product line organization. So the in motion pattern will be looking at things like your production infrastructure and your approach to risk management and tracking, and the monitor pattern does a lot of the same kinds of thing, but also takes care of making sure that the customer interface is continuing to be managed and that the funding model is still appropriate and the organizational structure is still appropriate. And we also have one that we call the cold start pattern, which is the set of practice areas that you would use to cover the high ground, like the funding and organizational structure and so on, to get a product line launched. So the factory pattern is a composite of these other patterns. The previous pattern was a pattern comprising several practice areas. This one is built on several patterns, which in turn are built on practice areas. So there's an evolution from left to right in terms of your state of product line practice. Over on the far left, when you are going through the decision about what to build, elsewhere in the organization, there are people taking care of things in the cold start pattern, dealing with the funding and the structure and the customer interface and so on. And then as you move towards the middle of this diagram into the phase where you are setting up the production infrastructure and the core asset base and so on, you have each asset that provides the tools and the process discipline and the measurement and tracking and so on for all of the assets in the core asset base. And then you have a slightly different pattern here that deals with the specific software assets, like the components and the requirements and the architecture that actually show up in the software products that you build. You also have the assembly line pattern supporting the building of products by providing the tool set, the process discipline, the organizational planning and risk management. And finally, over here, you are creating products using the assets from the core asset base. So again, a very high-level representation of a product line organization. Lots of detail left as an exercise for the product line manager, the product line architect, and the core asset and product builders. But this is the overall flow of activities in a product line organization in terms of these groupings of practice areas. There's a variant on this one that we call the adoption factory pattern. This is a pattern that is not covered in the book. All of these patterns are in the book with the exception of this one, and we will talk about the adoption factory pattern in a separate module. The documentation of the factory pattern is available as a technical report from the SEI website. So with the end target in mind, let's look at some of the constituent patterns of the factory pattern.